He promised his dying friend he'd marry her. She was poor, scarred, and braver than he'd ever be. Wyoming Territory near Silver Creek, late winter of 1879. The cattle drive camp lay smothered in white, wind clawing at the canvas tents until they sagged under ice and grit. Lantern light trembled on the seams, throwing thin gold across a bedroll soaked in fever sweat. On his knees beside it, Randy McAllister leaned close enough to feel the broken rasp of his friend's breath. Elias Carter blinked against snow sneaking under the flap. "Randy, when you reach Silver Creek, she will find you. Do not leave her alone. Marry her. Promise me." Randy's jaw tightened. "You know I do not intend to marry anyone." "I know," Elias whispered. "But she has no one, and she has endured more than you think." The gale rattled the guy ropes. Randy lifted the quilt higher over Elias's chest, tucking it tight. Outside, cattle lowed against the storm, riders cursing as they fought to hold the herd. He had always been the man who held the line, who kept his word like a lifeline. Looking at Elias now, he saw not the pale, sweat-soaked man before him, but the boy of 15 who had pulled him from a spring flood, both laughing to hide their shaking. A promise had been born there. Now the debt had come due, in a tent groaning like a ship in a winter sea. "Who is she?" Randy asked. "Carol Dawson," Elias breathed. "Kansas-born, can sew a seam in a windstorm. Writes truthful letters, not afraid of work. She took the long road because I said there was a home at the end of it. A name, a skill, a promise from a dying man, enough to bind Randy's course." He poured water into a tin cup, checked it with a finger, and lifted Elias to sip. The cough that followed left him shaking. "It was the mountain pass," Randy said quietly. "You wanted the herd through before the thaw turned the trail to mud." "It was right for the cattle," Elias rasped. "But I did not outrun the storm. The herd will live. I will not." Randy reached for the small roll of Elias's things. A nickel watch, a short pencil, a folded letter in careful script, and a clean handkerchief embroidered with a single E in blue thread. He smoothed the cloth, wrapped it in brown paper from a bar of soap, and tied it with a bootlace, his big hands moving with surprising gentleness. "I will see her," Randy said at last. "I will bring her the handkerchief. I will give her the truth. If she asks for my name beside hers at the church, I will place it there. If she needs a roof, I will see it stands over her. If she requires my presence at the table and my silence as well, I will give both. This is my word." Relief softened Elias's face. "That is enough. She deserves a man who will not frighten when the wind changes, a man who keeps promises when no one is watching." "I do not frighten," Randy replied. But inside he felt a different kind of unease, the kind that comes when a man sees a road and knows he must walk it alone in front of others. Generally, in a vision, Randy saw this moment in his head, as if events are alone. The cook, Pryor, pushed the flap aside, eyes red from smoke and cold. "He any better?" he asked, then saw the answer and removed his hat. "More hot water?" Randy said. They worked in silence, cooling a burning brow and warming chilled hands, the only mercies left to give. When Elias slept, Randy studied frost creeping along the inside of the canvas. 34 years old, foreman of the largest cattle spread in 3 counties, he was known for keeping his word and for staying clear of marriage built on duty. Now irony sat heavy. He had given his word in a storm, and that word would hold. He looked at the wrapped handkerchief by the lantern and pictured a woman's hand folding it into her palm, the blue E facing outward like a seal. That was all he knew of Carol Dawson, and it was enough. Elias stirred, eyes clearing for a moment. "Thank you," he said. "You pulled me from a river," Randy answered. "Consider this even." Elias smiled faintly. "Nothing is ever even," he murmured, then let his gaze drift back to the lantern flame. Relief chilled him. Outside, the wind rose again. Randy pulled the blanket higher and kept watch, minute by minute, breath by failing breath, while the storm ground its teeth and the little tent held. Silver Creek, Montana territory, 2 weeks later. The noon sun beat down on the dusty main street, turning every step into a crunch of grit. Wagon wheels creaked from the east road, and a knot of townsfolk gathered at the stage stop outside Murphy's General Store. Word had traveled fast. Randy McAllister was about to meet the fiancée of his late friend Elias Carter, a woman he had promised to marry. They came from all corners, the blacksmith wiping soot from his hands, Mrs. Dobbins from the bakery, still in her apron, ranch hands leaning on the hitch rail with sly grins. Everyone pictured her the same, thin, pale, desperate enough to cling to any man willing to take her in. Randy stood apart, hat low over his brow, ignoring the weight of their stares. In the distance came the rumble of hooves. The stagecoach appeared in a haze of dust, drawn by 4 tired horses. Driver Bill Cranford swung his whip once before pulling up in front of the store. The dust swirled lazily as the coach door swung open. A traveling salesman in plaid stepped down first, muttering about the heat. Then a weary woman clutching a quilt-wrapped bundle. The crowd shifted, waiting. Ugh! A gloved hand gripped the doorframe, followed by the hem of a dark green traveling dress. The woman who stepped down was nothing like they'd imagined. She stood tall, back straight, gaze sweeping the faces around her without a hint of shyness. Her chestnut hair was coiled neatly under a modest hat. A scar traced from below her left cheekbone toward her jaw, but it did nothing to dull the intelligence in her gray eyes. If anything, it sharpened her presence. A murmur rippled through the crowd. "That must be her," someone whispered. "Looks like she could stare down a grizzly," another muttered. She spotted Randy instantly, perhaps from Elias's letters, and crossed the space between them. "Mr. McAllister," she said, voice clear. "I am Carol Dawson." Randy tipped his hat. "Miss Dawson, my condolences for your loss." Her eyes searched his, unreadable. Then, loud enough for all to hear, she said, "Before we go any further, I want to be clear. If your promise to Elias was given only as kindness or pity, I will refuse, right here and now." The street went still. Even the horses shifted uneasily. Randy studied her, noting the lift of her chin and the steady set of her jaw. This was no woman come to beg for shelter. She was measuring him as much as he measured her. "You speak your mind," he said finally. "I do," she replied without apology. The onlookers whispered behind their hands. Randy felt a flicker of something unexpected, respect and a touch of curiosity. He had braced for a burden, a helpless stranger. Instead, here stood someone who looked ready to meet him stride for stride. A ranch hand chuckled under his breath, and Randy shot him a glance sharp enough to cut the sound short. "If you are here to judge my sincerity," Randy said evenly, "then we should speak somewhere less public." Carol gave a single nod. Agreed. Without another word, she stepped aside, waiting for him to lead. Her composure never faltered under the weight of every watching eye. Randy turned toward Murphy's store, feeling more than a few gazes follow them. As he held the door open for her, one thought struck him. He was genuinely interested in what this woman had to say. The back room of Murphy's General Store smelled faintly of coffee grounds, kerosene, and oiled leather. Dust motes floated in the thin shaft of light spilling from the high window. Randy closed the door behind them, shutting out the murmurs of the curious crowd still lingering on the porch. Carol remained standing, her hands folded neatly in front of her, eyes steady on his. She gave the impression of someone accustomed to holding her ground. "You wanted to speak privately," Randy began, removing his hat and setting it on a nearby crate. "Now's your chance." Carol did not waste time. "I am not here for charity, Mr. McAllister. I came because Elias offered me an arrangement built on mutual respect and practical benefit. If you intend to honor his promise, then that is what I expect from you, not pity, not ownership." Randy watched her closely. "You think I mean to treat you as property?" "I do not know what you mean," she replied, her tone measured. "That is why I am asking now. If you expect a silent, obedient figure to decorate your home, you should send me back on the next stage. I will not be that woman." He felt a faint tug of admiration at her bluntness. And what would you be? A partner, she said without hesitation. One who can contribute. I can work, I can earn, and I can stand on my own 2 feet. I will do my share in any household I am part of, but I will keep a measure of independence. There was no bitterness in her voice, only conviction. Randy leaned against a barrel, folding his arms. You talk like someone who has been burned before. A shadow passed over her features. I was a seamstress in Kansas. I had a small shop, my own. It took years to build it. Then, one night, a lantern was kicked over during a storm. The fire took the building in minutes. I managed to get out, but she turned her head slightly, and in the filtered light, the long pale scar on her cheek seemed to catch every detail. This came with me. My family had already lost the farm to debt. The shop was all we had left. After the fire, there was nothing. Randy did not look away from the scar, nor did he flinch. So you agreed to marry Elias? Yes, Carol said. We exchanged letters for months. We understood each other. He did not promise romance, and I did not expect it. We agreed on security, shared responsibility, and the freedom to speak plainly. Randy considered this in silence for a long moment. If we marry, he said at last, you'll be safe at the ranch. I'll see to that. But I expect you to live there. This country can be dangerous, and I won't have you in town alone without reason. She studied him. And in return? In return, he said, I will not demand anything you are unwilling to give. You'll have food, shelter, and my word on your safety. I'll give you the same respect I'd give any partner I ride alongside. Carol's gaze did not waver. And you understand, I will work. I will earn what I can, and I will keep some of what I earn. That's your right, Randy said. The answer seemed to surprise her. She inclined her head slightly. Then we are agreed, Mr. McAllister. This will be a practical marriage, respect, support, and nothing more than either of us wishes to give. Randy straightened, reached for his hat, and settled it back on his head. We'll speak to Reverend Thompson tomorrow. Best to make it official before the town invents more stories than they already have. A faint smile ghosted over her lips. They do seem eager for a show. Randy opened the door and stepped aside to let her pass. As she walked out into the bright afternoon, he felt the first stirrings of something unexpected. Not affection, not yet, but an undeniable sense that this woman might prove far more than he had bargained for. The wedding took place the next afternoon in the small clapboard church at the edge of Silver Creek. Only a handful of townsfolk attended. Mrs. Dobbins from the bakery, Murphy from the general store, 2 of Randy's ranch hands, and Reverend Thompson, who presided over the vows with a simple, unadorned blessing. There were no flowers save a few sprigs of wild sage in a jar on the altar. Carol wore the same dark green traveling dress she had arrived in, its neat lines a quiet statement of dignity. Randy stood beside her in a clean shirt and black vest, his hat left respectfully on the front pew. When the Reverend spoke the words, "Do you promise to honor and keep one another in mutual respect?" both answered in steady voices. There was no lingering glance, no romantic flourish, just a clear agreement, sealed with a firm handshake before they signed the register. By sundown, they walked to the boarding house, where Mrs. Kowalski greeted them warmly and handed them the key to the largest room. "The bridal suite," she announced with a wink, but Carol merely thanked her without a flicker of embarrassment. Inside, the room was modest but tidy, a large bed neatly made, a small table by the window, and a washstand in the corner. Randy set down his saddlebags by the wall. "I can take the chair," he said, nodding toward the upholstered armchair near the table. Carol shook her head. "That would be uncomfortable for you. We can arrange this sensibly. I will take the bed. You can make a pallet on the floor by the window. We're both used to harder sleeping than this, I imagine." "That's fair," Randy agreed. He began unrolling his blanket without protest. As they worked in silence, Carol broke it with a question he had not expected. "Do you know if the town has need of a seamstress, or perhaps a teacher for sewing?" Randy looked up. "You mean to take work?" "I do. I am better for having a purpose, and I prefer to earn my own money when I can." He considered her for a moment, then said, "Murphy might know. We'll ask him in the morning." The next day, Carol learned from Murphy that Silver Creek had no resident seamstress. Traveling menders came through only once a month, and folks made do in between. The opportunity was plain. By the week's end, Carol had located a narrow, unused room at the side of Murphy's store. The rent was more than she could easily afford, but she was determined. When she mentioned it to Randy, he simply nodded and said, "If it suits you, take it." What she did not know, what he did not intend her to know, was that later that evening, he spoke quietly to Murphy in the back of the store, settling half the rent in advance under the agreement that Carol never hear of it. "She's proud," Randy said. "Let her think she's paying it all. It'll mean more to her that way." Murphy nodded with a knowing smile. "You've got yourself a strong one there." Over the next days, Carol scrubbed the little space clean, set up a work table, and hung the tools of her trade, scissors, needles, spools of thread in careful rows. She sewed curtains for the single window, their pale fabric catching the morning light. Randy stopped by once, unannounced, leaning in the doorway as she hemmed a skirt. "Looks like you're ready for business." "Almost," she said, smiling faintly. "First customers should come tomorrow." He tipped his hat and left without another word, but something in the quiet satisfaction on her face stayed with him the rest of the day. Carol, for her part, noticed the ease with which the shop rent was handled, though she said nothing. She suspected Randy had a hand in it, but his silence told her he would rather she think it luck. That unspoken gesture, given without seeking thanks, spoke louder to her than any grand display. By her second month in Silver Creek, Carol's shop was a steady hum of activity. The front table was scattered with fabric, half-finished garments, and the occasional plate of cookies from Mrs. Kowalski at the boarding house. Mornings were for orders, mending trousers, altering dresses, stitching patches so neatly they looked part of the cloth. Afternoons brought 3 or 4 local girls, clumsy at first with needle and thread. Carol sat among them, guiding each stitch with patience. "You're not just learning to sew," she told them over a length of calico. "You're learning how to make sure you never have to depend on someone else for every coin in your pocket." By the third week, she had a circle of regular pupils, some paying with cash, others in eggs, flour, or firewood. She never turned away anyone willing to work. She also noticed the ragged children who passed her window to the schoolhouse. One boy's coat was so thin she could see daylight through the seams. A girl's dress was torn and pinned crookedly. One evening after closing, Carol repaired the garments and returned them quietly the next day. The children never knew who had mended their clothes, though the parents guessed. Her resolve didn't stop there. One night, locking up the shop, she heard shouting in the alley beside Murphy's store, a woman's voice, frightened. She found Mrs. Ellen Parsons, cheek red and swelling, backing from her whiskey-greeking husband. "Go back inside, Miss Dawson," Ellen gasped. Carol didn't move. She stepped between them. "That's enough," she said. "You've made your point, now leave her be." The man barked a laugh. "Or what? You'll sew me a lecture?" "Or I'll fetch Sheriff Walker and the whole town will hear why," she replied, steady as stone. Something in her voice made him hesitate. After a tense moment, he muttered a curse and staggered away. Ellen clutched her hands. "You shouldn't have done that, but thank you." "No one should be afraid in their own home," Carol said simply. The story traveled fast. Some said she should have stayed out of it. Others, especially the women, admired her. Not everyone respected her yet. A few whispered about the scarred woman when they thought she couldn't hear. Carol ignored it, letting her work speak. Each satisfied customer, each perfect garment, chipped away at the prejudice. The turning point came on a Saturday when a half-drunk rancher, Clay Dobson, stumbled in. Dropping a torn vest on the counter, he said, "Fix it, I'll pay you next month." Carol slid it back. "No credit, Mr. Dobson, you know my terms." He leaned over, grinning in a way that made the 2 girls in the back pause. "Don't be difficult. It's just a bit of mending. You can trust me." "I don't do business on trust alone," she said evenly. "Pay first or take it elsewhere." The shop went silent. Dobson's grin faltered under her steady gaze. With a grunt, he He took the vest and left. By evening the town knew. Some laughed at his embarrassment, others nodded in approval. In a place where a woman's business could be undercut in a dozen ways, Carol had stood firm. Randy heard from Murphy before he heard from her. That night, stopping by to walk her to the boarding house, he found her sweeping the floor, lamplight glinting on the scissors at her work table. "You handled Dobson well," he said. She looked up. "It wasn't anything." "It was," he said. "You kept your rules, and you didn't let him push you." He watched her gather scraps into a basket, her movements calm, unhurried. It struck him that her strength wasn't in loud defiance, but in the quiet, steady way she refused to bend. As they stepped into the cool night air, Randy realized he had never met another woman like Carol Dawson. The respect he felt for her was becoming something deeper, something he hadn't expected when he'd made that promise in a snowbound tent. It was a Sunday afternoon when Carol first mentioned the idea. They sat at the boarding house kitchen table, ledger books open. She had been studying the ranch figures Randy brought while she finished her own accounts. "You've got unused ground on the north side of your property," she said, tapping the page. "Rough pasture," Randy replied. "Not much good for cattle." "Not for cattle," she agreed. "But it could grow flax. Flax becomes linen and linen sells well, especially here, where good cloth is hard to find. We could spin and weave it locally, cut dependence on the rail line, avoid delays, and turn a better profit." Randy leaned back. "Flax takes work. Timing matters." "I know," Carol said, sliding a folded sheet across the table. "Here's the math. Seed cost, labor, yield per acre. Start with 10 acres, and you could see 3 to 4 times your investment in the first year, if we find skilled spinners and weavers." Her handwriting was neat, her plan simple but thorough. "You put a lot of thought into this," he said. "I put thought into everything I mean to succeed at." That was the first time Randy asked her to sit with him while he went over the ranch's books. Soon he was seeking her opinion on grazing rotations, supply orders, even which bulls to keep. She thought in years, not seasons, and it showed. One evening, after closing the shop, Carol started the short walk to the boarding house. The street was quiet except for light spilling from the saloon. She heard uneven footsteps, one of the cattle yard hands, weaving slightly, the smell of whiskey strong on his breath. "Evenin', Miss Dawson," he slurred, "or should I say Mrs. McAllister?" "I'm on my way home," she said, trying to pass. He stepped into her path. "You're a fine-looking woman. Shame to waste all that behind a counter." Before she could answer, a steady hand settled on the man's shoulder. Randy stood there, calm but watchful. "Go home," he said. The man tried to grin. "Just talking." "I said go home." It wasn't loud, but it left no room for doubt. The man muttered and staggered toward the saloon. 2 townsfolk across the boardwalk slowed to watch, saying nothing until he was gone. Randy turned to her. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, catching her breath. "Thank you." "Walk you home?" he replied. They moved in silence, boots sharp in the night air. At the boarding house steps, she studied him. "You didn't have to do that so quietly," she said. "Most men would have made a scene." "Most men," he said, "want to prove they can fight more than they want to stop trouble. I'm interested in stopping trouble." Carol smiled faintly. "You're a careful man, Randy McAllister. Careful keeps people safe. Good night, Carol." That night, lying in bed, she thought about how he had appeared without warning, how his voice carried quiet steel, and how he hadn't claimed her in front of anyone. He had simply made sure she was safe. It was, she realized, the truest kind of protection, the kind that sought no credit and expected nothing in return. The winter hit Silver Creek hard, laying a thick white quilt over the valley and driving even the most stubborn ranch hands to the barns. Snow rattled the boarding house windows, the cold biting through wool and leather. Randy had been in town since early morning, talking with the bank about 400 acres of pasture north of his fence. He had run the numbers twice, and they looked solid, but as he stepped into the wind, collar pulled high, something slowed him. Through the frosted window of Carol's shop, he saw her kneeling beside a boy no older than 8. The child's coat was patched, boots too big. Carol was showing him how to fold bright scraps of fabric around a small carved horse, tying it neatly with twine. Her hands moved with the same precision she used at the sewing table, but her face was softer, warmer, as if her steadiness could hold the boy against the cold world. Randy lingered until the boy grinned shyly, clutching the bundle, and ran into the snow. Carol straightened, brushed hair from her cheek, and for a moment looked toward the window. He could not tell if she saw him, but something pulled in his chest. When he stepped inside, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up from the counter. "You're out early for a day like this?" "Bank meeting," he said, stamping snow from his boots. "About the Morrison land, north of my fence. Good ground." "You're thinking of buying?" "I was," he admitted. Then he paused. "But that's not the only reason I came." Her brows lifted. "No?" He stepped closer, his voice low. "Carol, this isn't about a promise anymore. It hasn't been for a while." Her eyes held his. "I want you as my wife. Not because Elias asked me, not because it's practical. Somewhere along the way, you became the person I look for first in the morning and last at night. You've built something here, at the shop, the ranch, in this town, that I can't imagine without. I want that with you. I want you." The silence seemed to hold the hiss of snow against the windows. "You have a strange sense of timing," she said softly. "I've been in love with you for weeks, but I told myself to keep it quiet. We had an agreement." "I remember," he said, faintly smiling. "Respect, support, nothing more than we wish to give. I'm wishing for more now." She laughed once, shook her head. "So am I." He reached for her, and she stepped into his arms without hesitation. The first kiss was unhurried, warm, carrying none of their old reserve. Outside, snow swirled in thick curtains, but in the shop, the world had narrowed to breath and certainty. When they parted, she rested her forehead to his. "So, what about the land?" "We'll buy it," he said, "if you think it's a good move." "I do," she answered. "We'll make it pay for itself in 3 years." They left the shop together, walking through the muffled quiet of falling snow to the boarding house. Inside, the kitchen was warm from the stove, soup simmering in a big pot. Randy shrugged off his coat. She moved to hang it near the fire. He caught her hand before she stepped away. "I meant what I said. This is real for me now." "I know," she replied. "It's real for me too." Outside, snow kept falling, but in that warm kitchen, the cold and the distance that had once stood between them had melted away completely. They were no longer two practical partners bound by duty. They were husband and wife, in truth, building a future as solid and unshakable as the land under the winter drifts. By the end of that hard winter, the decision about the Morrison land was made. Randy and Carol sat at the kitchen table of the ranch house, maps and ledgers spread before them, coffee cooling by their elbows. Outside, snow reflected pale light through the windows. Inside was warm with the hum of planning. "We can run more cattle here," Randy said, pointing to a pasture square. "Rotate the herd so the grass recovers faster." Carol nodded, jotting figures into the margin. "The north edge is flat, perfect for a flax field. We could train some of the ranch hands' wives to help harvest, then weave the linen here. It would bring in extra income during the slow months." "Then it's settled," Randy said. "We'll build it together." They worked for hours, the ease between them as natural as breathing. It was no longer just about cattle or crops. It was about shaping something lasting. In town, Carol's shop was becoming more than a business. She started a weekly sewing class for women. 2 widows, a rancher's daughter, and Mrs. Parsons, the woman Carol had defended in the alley. Soon others joined, some bringing their children, chatter and laughter filling the space. "It's not just about clothes," Carol told Randy one evening. "It's about giving them a skill that's theirs, something no one can take away." Randy, who had never thought much about a needle beyond keeping his shirts in one piece, was proud of what she was building. He had seen her change in the town's eyes, from the scarred woman to someone respected, even relied upon. One night, finishing supper by the fire, Randy set his coffee aside. "Carol," he said quietly, "maybe Elias knew exactly what he was doing when he asked me to marry you." She tilted her head. "You think so?" He nodded. "That man never made a move without a reason. I think he saw we'd be good for each other before we saw it ourselves." For a moment she only watched the flames curl in the hearth. Then she smiled softly. "If that's true, I'll be grateful to him for the rest of my life." Randy reached across the table and took her hand. "So will I." That night, long after the lamps were turned down, Randy stood in the quiet bedroom. Carol was asleep, her breathing deep and even, the faint firelight catching the curve of her cheek. On the shelf by the window sat a small box. He opened it and took out the handkerchief, white cloth, the blue-stitched letter E still neat. He held it a moment, the memory of that snowbound tent clear as if it had been yesterday. Without a word, he set the folded handkerchief on the table beside her, close enough for her to see when she woke. It was not for thanks or explanation. It was a promise kept, and a quiet acknowledgement of the man who had set them on this path. Outside, snow fell in soft sheets over the dark fields. Inside, the fire burned low, warm against the cold, its light wrapping around them both. Randy watched her for a long moment, then climbed into bed beside her, knowing what began as duty had become the truest gift of his life. And that's how a promise made in a snowbound tent became something far greater, a partnership built on respect, a home forged through hard work, and a love that neither of them had expected, but both of them had been searching for all along. If you enjoyed this journey into the heart of the old American West, filled with grit, courage, and love that stands the test of time, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories. We bring you more tales of romance, resilience, and the untamed spirit of the frontier, stories that will warm your heart and stir your soul. Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell so you never miss a story, and saddle up for our next adventure. Out here in the wide open West, love always finds a way.